The photos that I'm going to share with you are from my most recent overseas experience of accompaniment, because it's important to me that I continue to hold those images up and to share those images for others. And for me, it really enlivens me and grounds me in the purpose of being a faithful person who walks in the accompaniment of our God and of Jesus. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I understand accompaniment. And this is me sharing the task of baking bread with one of my sisters in Palestine, Aliyah, who lives in Wadi Jahash. So for me, accompaniment is to be a companion and to share the stuff of life, whatever that might be. To share bread, to share tears, to share labor, and to share celebration. And so the opportunity to sleep and wake alongside the people wherever one finds them, to share the baking of the bread and the gathering of the things to make bread, and all that that entails. For me as well, accompaniment is about, for me, to learn the way of God's people. Not, the United Church doesn't send people overseas to bring the gospel, to teach the gospel, but to live the experience of God's people where we find them. And to witness that, to witness how God is active in the lives of the others among us. And as well, to be open to new ways of experience God's presence and being changed by that. So we bring who we are and the community that we represent, but not to tell that story, but to live alongside of. It's about experiencing and being open to the values and the culture of who one encounters. And that's equally true of the clients who walk into my office here in Winnipeg, as it is the people that I walked alongside in Palestine, the people among whom my family and I lived for 3 years when we were in Trinidad, or the people who I visited briefly in the mountains of the Philippines. There's understanding that those are all unique places and people, and that one encounters that with a respect and an openness. So other two folks that I wanted to share with you, Isa Muhammad, who takes care of his olive trees and waters them by hand. So he accompanies the life of the creation around him. And another picture of Aliyah, who in the community that she shares, the hospitality, the culture of hospitality, welcome, and sharing what they have with open hearts. There's grace and humility in coming from the culture I do, and walking into a place and being so deeply received with reverence and hospitality. And to walk alongside communities and cultures. These are young Muslim boys who've just returned from the mosque for prayer, and some of their companions in the village who are walking to a protest, and both of them choosing to be faithful in how they share what they understand the Creator, what they understand God calling them to do. Not to speak, but to listen to the stories of people's lives. So this fellow who lives in a very challenged village in Palestine has a master's degree in fine arts, but he chooses to live in his small village right next to a settlement, and he has chosen to make his art out of the discards that he finds in the dump. And what he makes are airplanes and helicopters and bulldozers out of discarded items. And he makes those things because he says those items in and of themselves, although in his life, in his village, have been items of destruction, he chooses to make them to say that they themselves, the objects of themselves, are not evil. It's the purposes to which they're made. And he constructs stories to tell about each of those objects and challenges all of us to say that what God calls us to do with the tools at our disposal is how we live out our faith. So Eid Suleiman, to listen to that story and then to ask to see his art. Some people only ask to hear the story, but he's very humble about his art, so you have to find a way to get him to invite you down to the workshop. Accompaniment means to stand with the people as they face challenges. So to live not in a separate community, but to live alongside, to experience when the tank of water falls off the tower and breaks and you have to use rainwater for 7 months to wash diapers because that's what the people do. Or in this instance, to stand with the people as they protest oppression, to accompany them on that journey, both for safety and for witness and for the opportunity to tell the story, and also to stand with them in their suffering. So in that event, we were all tear-gassed. And I would say that one of my deepest fears as I was preparing for the opportunity to be an accompanier was, would I have the courage to stand with them? And if I just really questioned myself, if when the going got tough, would I turn tail? Because I've never experienced that, so how did I know? How would I have known? So for me to be able to say that would have been my hope, and sadly, that then was the opportunity that I had to exercise being with the people. To experience and learn from failure with humility and humor. Getting up so early to gather the things and bake the bread, and making a totally pathetic lump of bread. If you saw earlier, those lovely round things which are made all with hand and laid on the stones. And Alia humored me and let me use the last bit of the dough, but she certainly wouldn't serve what I cooked. And I think that the opportunity to share that humanity and to be alongside and to accept correction when it's offered. Another time I can tell you the story about not cutting the toenails off the chicken when I made chicken's feet for serving for company in another context. So, to befriend and to be befriended. So as much as to share the emotions and the experiences and the lives, to know that you yourself are accompanied in that, and at times to accept the comfort. I miscarried a child when I lived in Trinidad, and being able to receive the care of the women of that community was deeply important to me. So to share the stories of the people with others, as I'm doing here, and why? To make the world smaller and closer, to celebrate God's presence, to encourage the work for God's justice and peace. And when I think about scripture that motivates me, I could make many, and I've opened the Bible to Micah 6. So accompaniment is God. What does God require? Accompanying one another's in all aspects of life, the ministry of kindness, to seek justice and to make peace. Looking for justice requires putting oneself forward, and to walk humbly with God and in God's presence. So walking humbly means the willingness to live in a broken, open-hearted way, a willingness to be transformed, to risk being wrong, and to risk being opened to newness, to be surprised by joy and hope. An accompaniment is the assurance that we are not alone. And so we resist those things that call us into isolation. We resist those things that let us let go into the temptation of bigotry. And we resist being silent. So this is living into hope. And at this point, it's passing the candle flame to the next group of accompaniers that come along. And so this was the service, what we call the handover ceremony, and an opportunity to share that flame and to know that we're not alone, that there are others who walk this path with us. And so I just want to share the faces of some of the children that continue to bring me hope and challenge, and that days set, moons rise, and the sun rises again. So we each have a challenge and an opportunity to live this every day. So, thanks.